It's a bit of a somber moment for me. A couple of hours ago, I got an email from the United States. And I was notified that someone who had been a very close friend at one point in my life, my best friend, and in my youth, um, died yesterday. He had been battling cancer and he kept it quiet. Very few people knew it, his wife and maybe his physicians, but he didn't tell anybody. And I'm feeling a bit guilty. The reason I'm feeling a bit guilty is this. Well, let me tell the whole story. I don't want anybody to think I'm boasting about my old nature or trying to glorify what I used to be or used to do. That is not my motive. Not at all. And I'm not trying to name drop or impress anybody. I'm just going to tell you what happened. I had this friend until yesterday, but I had not seen him in a long time. And we'd been through a lot together. As kids, I went through the whole thing when his mother was battling breast cancer when he was a teenager, and his mother died. And we went through a lot of things together. All kinds of things. We were quite close. We were friends for years, but we were quite close for some time. And in those days, I hung out and he hung out on the fringes of the rock music industry of the 1960s, early 70s, that kind of thing. And again, I'm not trying to impress anybody or name drop, but I knew people and he got to know people. And we were in this scene together with one or two other guys. And anyway, when I become a Christian, I had to get away from it because of the sexual immorality, certainly, that was rife in that particular industry, but also the cocaine addiction. The Lord set me free from that, and I needed to be away from cocaine that was prolifically consumed by people in that industry. It was also in the fashion industry. It was also in film and Hollywood, but it was certainly in pop music. This is the world. And I needed to get away from it. And I was, some of my friends know, I was offered a management contract on a very major rock band who I knew was going to make it. And they did make it, but I turned it down. It would have destroyed my faith. It probably would have destroyed my life, even though we're talking very large amounts of money. I don't need to go into it, but very large amounts of money would have come into play. Anyway, my friend, he was the drummer for a rock band, pop band called Blondie, and for the Eurythmics. And he did session work, and he played with major people. He played with David Bowie, who I didn't know well. I just met him. And he played with, Bob Dylan, and he played with Pete Townsend from The Who, and, Iggy Pop, and major figures. He was a known quantity. He was a really, really good drummer who followed in the footsteps of people like Keith Moon of The Who, and Hal Blaine, the session musician from the Wrecking Crew in Los Angeles. He was that kind of a really good quality drummer. And a lot of top people wanted him to play on their recordings, but he was in a couple of rather successful bands. And again, wanting to get away from that business, I just switched off from it. And I went through an incubation period, I call it, for maybe 2.5 to 3 years, certainly 2.5 years of my Christian life, when I finally said, I'm going to walk with Jesus. And I would not listen to anything but traditional hymns, to John Wesley and Fanny Crosby, and things like that. Augustus Toplady, Isaac Watts, they were okay. But I didn't want to listen particularly to rock music or rhythm and blues or soul music. And I didn't want to listen to, if you can believe it, to classical music, because I used to listen to Tchaikovsky and things like this and Mozart when I was high on drugs. So I was into classical music. I was also into various things, but certainly rock and classical would have been the main things. And I just had to get away from it. It wasn't just music to me. It was part of this lifestyle that involved drugs, including psychedelic drugs. When I was in high school, it was LSD. When I got to university, it was cocaine. And I needed just to get away from it. But now I'm feeling a bit guilty. When he would play with Blondie or whoever, they'd play at Glastonbury or they'd play in England concerts, I could have went. I could have got a stage pass, one phone call. They sent greetings to me. I could have gone, taken my children who were young at that time. I could have done anything like that. I would have been welcome, stage passes, whatever, and I just never did. I was working on a film project, and it was being filmed in London at a major hotel in Chelsea, and they were staying there. The Blondie and they were staying there, and I was in the hotel filming stuff, and no personal nothing. I just didn't want to. I was busy with what I was doing, but I just could have gone and said hello at least, being in the same hotel, and I didn't. And he lived in Studio City, just literally up the road from where the Moriel TV studio is in North Hollywood, in Hollywood, near Universal City. And just literally less than 10 minutes drive. And I knew he lived in Studio City. I could have called somebody, found out, and went and see, but I just didn't. And I regret it now. If I knew he was battling cancer, I would have gone and tried to share Jesus with him. Now, he knew what I believed. He knew what I believed. But I just didn't want to be associated, not so much to avoid him personally, but just anything that had to do with that area of my life, of my old nature. Because it reminds me of a lot of things. About 3 weeks ago, another guy I knew, not well, but I knew him. I knew the New York Dolls. They were not as successful as, they were like the American Sex Pistols, only before. And they had the same manager, Brian McLaren. I remember when Brian McLaren came from London to New York to Club 82, and he took over the management of the New York Dolls. And I remember the whole thing. This wouldn't work in, the punk thing wouldn't work in America because there was too much affluence, but it was the winter of discontent and the UB40 and the youth unemployment, all that. It would have worked in Britain, and he realized that. And he took this thing that came from this scene in New York. We used to hang out at this place called Max's Kansas City and then a place called Club 82. But these bands, they came out of something called Mercer Arts in Manhattan. And there were people who hung out with Andy Warhol's crowd, the pop artists. Now, I'd seen Andy Warhol around. I was at parties where he was with something like that, but I didn't know him. He was from Pittsburgh, where the Moriel headquarters used to be. But it was that kind of scene and those kinds of people. And I knew people in it, and I hung out at these places and things like this. And the leader of the New York Dolls, and I knew all of them pretty much, but David Johansen died 3 weeks ago. Again, I was with my daughter once in Los Angeles, and we went to a graveyard called Hollywood Forever to see where the Little Rascals, our gang, were buried. They were children comedy actors. And I went there, and I seen a statue of a guy playing a guitar on top of a grave, and I went to see who that was, and it was somebody I knew. It was one of the Ramones, a band called the Ramones, and I knew these guys. Again, I didn't think they had a bass player named Dee Dee, who was a nice guy who I liked, but I didn't really like the rest of them, and I didn't think they were very good. They were produced by Phil Spector, the producer, to get a sound out of them. I knew, again, I kind of knew I knew the guy who signed them, got them the record contract. He was an A&R man called Danny Fields, who had previously worked with the Doors. And he signed the Ramones, and I knew these guys. They're all dead, and they're all buried in that graveyard. Um, you know, what's the point of it? What's the point of it? It was just death. Again, I'm not trying to name drop here, but I remember I was at Mick Jagger's birthday party, and I was getting high with the drummer of the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watts. And that party was so phony. I saw all these record executives and music publishers, and they were all up there with the Stones and all this, and Dylan and everybody, and we're all in the party. And I went with Cal Basie, the jazz musician, and with everybody sniffing cocaine and sipping champagne and whatever's going on. And kids, you know, were trying to get into the party, who stood in line for days to get tickets to the Rolling Stones. And they asked one, and I was in the elevator at the time, and they asked one of the Rolling Stones, "Can you get us into the party?" And he, "No, I can't get you in here." You know, they didn't care. It was so phony. The whole thing was phony. And, you know, I knew some of these people, again, not all, I knew some of them pretty well, but most of them I just kind of knew from being in the scene. Like Bill Graham, the concert promoter, and people like that. I had a fight with him once, but that was all right after that. But anyway, and, you know, I'd met these people like the Grateful Dead, and they were nice, but I didn't like their music. But I was into the English music thing. You know, I thought David Bowie was going to be like the next Elvis or the next Beatles at one point, and Roxy Music and things like this. And we were in the scene, you know. But obviously, immorality was widespread. And drugs were endemic. And in New York, it was this underground thing. I used to go to the Troubadour in Los Angeles and the Roxy Theater and to the Marquee Club in London, the old Marquee Club in Soho on Wardour Street. But in New York, there was this, like, an underground thing with these Andy Warhol type people. Everybody was singing about love and peace and hippies and all this, and these guys were singing about transvestite prostitutes and heroin addiction. They followed a band called the Velvet Underground, and that was the germinal influence for everything that was so underground. It was so far removed from the mainstream of society. But Andy Warhol said, you know, in less than 10 years, people won't care about truth or peace or love or ending the Vietnam War. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be about this. And whether you like him or not, he was a prognosticator. Andy Warhol was like a sociologist who used pop art instead of a typewriter or word processor to predict what society was going to become like. He saw the trends coming. He understood what consumerism was going to be like. He would just like paint pictures of Campbell's soup cans and stuff. I remember I was a kid. He got shot by this woman, Valerie Solanas. I mean, it was just a crazy world that I was in when I was a teenager and a bit older. It was just a crazy world, very crazy world. And it turned me off. But now I'm feeling guilty. I did not go talk to Clem Burke. He lived like 6 blocks from me as children. Our parents, our fathers knew each other, but he played in a band that was local band. It was just somebody who, his whole life he wanted to be a rock star or a pop star. His mind was always in the 1960s London, swinging London scene, only he was American from the outskirts of New York City. But he wanted that, and he got it. He got it. Where is he now? And I'm bothered that right down the road from Moriel TV in Los Angeles, or being in the same hotel that was filming in London, I didn't go out of my way to talk to him when I could have. Not that I had anything against him. It's just that scene and that life reminded me of things I didn't want to be reminded of. And it was soaked in death. Well, I speak only for myself. It's no secret among some people that the Memorial International Administrator, David Lister, he worked in Graceland when Elvis Presley died in Memphis. David worked for Elvis's brother Ricky, who worked for Elvis in turn. David, well, I won't tell you what he did, what some of his tasks were, but he was in Graceland when Elvis died. He'd seen, now how big of a star can you get? I recall getting the Chronicles of Narnia for John Lennon before he died. I spoke to him briefly after Dakota, very briefly. I saw him one more time after that on 72nd Street. I lived in Israel at the time, but I happened to be in New York, and I was trying to witness to him. The Lord just told me to try to give him the gospel. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but I tried to give him the gospel. I saw him one more time after that on 72nd Street in a limousine, and right after that, he got shot dead. Then there was George Harrison. You know, I got the book Death of a Guru because he was a Hindu. And my grandmother was from Liverpool. She was a Scouse. And I wrote a note and in the book, and I said, look, if you grew up in the slums of Calcutta, India, instead of in Speke, which is a housing estate in Liverpool where he lived, do you think you'd be living in a castle in Henley-on-Thames? Look what Hinduism has done for India. The truth is Jesus, not the Liverpool Irish Catholic Jesus, which is what he grew up in, but the real Jesus of the gospel. Anyway, my friend, who's now retired, is an oral hygienist in Henley, and she used to clean his teeth, George Harrison's teeth. And she gave him the book with my note in it. He was so angry, he threw the book, and then he took the book with him, though. And not long after that, somebody broke into his castle in Henley, Friar Park, and stabbed him in the chest multiple times. Almost died. God showed him mercy. And he dies after that in Los Angeles singing Hare Krishna. Oh, man. And he gets cremated in that same cemetery where I was with showing my daughter the little rascals' graves. And oh, it goes on like this. You know, Charlie Watts, the drummer of the Stones, I mean, these people are dead. These people are dead. Somehow going back to Robert Johnson, the blues musician who was the forerunner of rock, that industry has always killed. The Big Bopper and Buddy Holly and Richie Valens in the 50s. And then in the 60s, Jim Morrison, you know, and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones. They would just die one after another. John Lennon gets shot dead. There's a culture of death, an aura of death around that industry. Well, Clem, the drummer who died yesterday, my friend, close friend, he identified himself as a rock survivor. He was into survivability. He thought he was going to be one of those guys. This is what he said. He thought he'd be one of those guys like Keith Richards or Mick Jagger or Bob Dylan or Paul McCartney or the Kinks like Dave Davies or Ray Davies and Dave Davies. I know Dave Davies, and he was also a friend of Dave Davies from the Kinks. These are guys who made it into their 80s and things like that, and even late 80s. Ringo Starr. He thought he could be one of them, a rock survivor. Well, he's lucky he made it to 70. He gave up the ghost yesterday. Now, I'm not saying that there are not people who have not been saved in that industry. Most of the Christian pop stars I've met have not been too knowledgeable biblically. Helen Shapiro being an exception. Most have not been too discerning or too knowledgeable. I remember Norm Stone from the BBC came to New York and was at a Christian Artists Fellowship, And Cliff Richard was with him. Cliff Richard is not known in America. But I knew who he was from England, but in America he was not known. And I met him, and he was a nice person and everything. But again, there was not much depth among Christians in that industry, the few that there are. Now, there were people I tried to give the gospel to. There were in that industry, but you don't get too far. However, having said that, about a month ago, Moriel in Britain had a concert with Simon, Chrissy Rogers, and Helen Shapiro. And it was a blessed event, and somebody got saved, and the music was Christ-honoring. Helen Shapiro is not known in America, but she's certainly known in Britain and the British Commonwealth countries. The Beatles were her opening act on their first concert tour, theater tour of England. That's how popular she was in the 1960s. The Beatles were her opening act. She is a Jewish believer. The rabbis don't like her, obviously, but she is 100% into gospel music for Jesus. Not for money, not for fame. She's had all that. She's in it for the Lord Yeshua, her Messiah. She has a wonderful witness and testimony. But she'd be an exception. She'd be an exception. I have another dear friend who I was just emailing with the other day, who was the wife of one of the Rolling Stones, who's come to faith, and we knew a lot of people. We had been partied together and things like this, and we knew a lot of people in common. And she got saved, and I got saved, and now we're close friends. We're close friends, her and her second husband, who's also a believer. She got divorced and remarried after getting saved. Anyway, she's in it for the Lord, and she does gospel music. A couple of months ago, I was in the States and spent a little bit of time, some time, speaking to Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper and his wife are definitely saved believers. They're born again. No doubt, no question, that's where they're at. I don't say God can't do it. I know, Rose Taylor and Helen Shapiro and Alice Cooper. His real name is Vince. I know there are people in that industry who have come to faith, but they didn't go into that industry as believers. They were in that industry and got saved in it while they were in it. I don't say God can't save people in it. God can save anybody. But it's the world on steroids. That is also true of Hollywood. That is true of the fashion industry. But I think perhaps above all, it is true of the pop music industry. It is the world on steroids. I'm reading from the first epistle of John, chapter 2, verse 17. The world is passing away and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever. The world is passing away. It's in the wicked one, and it's passing away, and its lusts. The lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the boastful pride of life. Again, the availability of drugs and people even giving it to you at parties or just to hang out with you. And women wanting to sleep with you or whatever it is. The lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the boastful pride of life, being in front of the camera, being on television, being on stage, it is something. It's a stronghold of Satan. The world is in his power. But the media is really in his power. Speaking from my own experience and what I've seen. Now, again, I've known some of the top people. And so is David Lister. How big can you get, working for Elvis? But Elvis Presley, but be that as it may, some of the black rhythm and blues artists who founded rock music, the forerunners of rock, they had mothers and grandmothers in the American South who were Pentecostal and Baptists. I went down there on Route 60, Highway 61. We visited. Bob Dylan has an album named after it. And the whole thing with the legend of Robert Johnson and down in the Mississippi Delta where rock and roll came from, Tupelo, Mississippi, and all this, and the Tallahatchie Bridge and things like that. And I went there with your B.B. King, and Howling Wolf and Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson. Every one of these black blues guys, every one of them, had gospel verses etched on their tombstones. Every one of them knew the gospel. Every one of them had a mother and a grandmother who was a saved Christian praying for their salvation. I didn't find one exception. I knew it. The world has a lure. The world has a lure. Lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, boastful pride of life. It's in the power of the wicked one. There's a reason so many of these people die young and tragically. And what can you do about it other than pray and not get contaminated by it yourself? On one hand, my own revulsion at not wanting to be around that thing, I can justify as a Christian because I know what it was. I know it's the world. And I know how many people it's killed and lives it's destroyed. But right now I'm sitting here with a feeling of guilt. Why didn't I go see Clem? If I knew he was really sick with cancer, I certainly would have. But it's too late now. And I was in the same hotel with the guy and I didn't go talk to him. Not because I disliked him. Not because I wouldn't have been glad to see him. I just was turned off by that industry. Why, when I'm in LA, couldn't I get in the car, drive 10 minutes up to go see him up in the Studio City? Why? Too late now. Not saying I couldn't, not saying that he would have come to faith. I'm not saying that it was guaranteed I could lead him to Christ. But when people are really sick and they're facing death, they're a lot more open much of the time. And right now, there's nothing I can do about it. That's one aspect. Let me tell you about two other aspects. As a young believer, before I immigrated to Israel, I attended a church in New York called the Lambs Club. And it was a showcase for contemporary Christian music of that time. And there were some talented people. There were people like Chuck Girard and Randy Stonehill was popular then, and Larry Norman, which we'd all been ready. These were the founders of what we call Christian rock or Christian pop. And they would come there, the Edwin Hawkins singers and people like this. There was a lot of talent around then in that genre of Christian music. This was when it was still pretty much a ministry, not yet an industry. Gospel music after that time became an industry based in Nashville, Tennessee, where the recording companies and even the music publishing companies were secularly owned, and they became businesses. But then it was still ministry-oriented, pretty much. But even then, I saw things I didn't like. And there was another sister who was the daughter of the biggest music copyright lawyers in the United States. And her brother and her father handled everybody. I don't want to name the names. But we saw the same kind of pride that we saw in the secular music industry, we began to see in the Christian music ministry. Where do you get off selling tickets to unsaved people to hear the gospel, even though they give their testimony or an altar call at the concert? That was a problem. And now I know there was expenses that had to be covered, but it should have been by sponsorship. In any event, we were there and we had people like Paul Stuckey from Peter, Paul and Mary, Puff the Magic Dragon, became a Christian and performed, and these other people. And I liked it. At the same time, I began to see things that were not exactly going the right way. And before long, what had been Christian music ministry morphed into the Christian music industry. It became more and more worldly. I'm not saying it had the groupies and the drugs, but it certainly had other things that I wish it didn't. And it became a business. And the fanfare. But then there's something else. Being in that background, to the degree I was, and I was in it enough to know what it was. And I knew people who really knew what it was. With the televangelism, I began to see the cult of celebrity getting into the church. Hype artistry, showmanship, not real anointing of the Spirit, not real exposition of God's word, but hype artistry and showmanship. And I saw the mockery that people like Benny Hinn and Morris Cerullo made of the ministry of the gospel with the backing of churches and denominations. The gospel was discredited. Wait a minute. This is the kind of stuff I saw in the world. The fanfare, the adulation, the praise of men, the money. Not the money itself, but the love of money. And then immorality. Widespread sexual immorality. Widespread. Bill Hybels, Mike Bickle, Benny Hinn walking with Paula White on the Via Venuto in Rome, Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart. Take your pick. Same kind of pride, same kind of love of money, and the same kind of adulation, fanfare, praise of men that I saw in the secular pop music industry. I saw a religious version of it in the church. First, I saw it in the music ministry, morphing into the music industry. Then I saw it with preachers. And the same things that turned me so much off that I wanted to get away from the secular music industry. The same things that turned me so much off as a believer that I wanted to just have nothing to do with it anymore. I'm seeing in the body of Christ. I don't want to have anything to do with it. The Nashville Christian music industry. Televangelism. What do we read? The world is passing away and also its lusts. Oh, my Lord. You look at some of these people, these crazy people with these crazy things, this Carolyn Glick in Los Angeles and Kenneth Copeland. How could Christians listen to this? See, the thing is, there's not many Christians in the pop music industry. Not many. Not many at all. But in the Christian music ministry, you'd expect something different. Now, I'm not saying that there are not individual exceptions, but they are the exceptions. The kind of music ministry that we'd associate with Iris Sankey or with George Beverly Shea or Evie Tornquist or things like this, or Mahalia Jackson. These things are largely gone. Largely gone. Not all of it, but most of it's gone. It's gone the way of the world. Hollywood, it began with the PTL Club and took off from there. The way of the world. Including the love of money, the praise of men, the adulation and fanfare, and the immorality. As a young believer, the things that turn me off about the secular music scene, the pop music scene, I was on the periphery of it. I was really not an insider, but I'd been to the parties and I knew the people and things like this. And even the big names I knew, I only knew them casually or met them. There was some I knew. But I knew enough to know what it was. And I knew enough to know I want to get away from it. The world is crazy. Some of you know one of my closest friends is David Berkowitz, the 44 caliber killer known as the Son of Sam. He's the most notorious serial killer in American history, more so than Manson. Manson had other people do the killing. David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, did his own killing. He's like the Yorkshire Ripper, American equivalent of the Yorkshire Ripper, only worse. You wouldn't believe the miraculous power of Christ in his life that has changed his life, and how he went to the families of the people he murdered and tried to witness to them and repent of what he did. And he'll tell you, he was not only criminally insane, he was demon-possessed. But Jesus saved him and forgave him. Some liberal lawyers wanted to get him out of prison, saying that he was mentally ill at the time, but he's no longer mentally ill, he shouldn't be in prison. He wrote a letter to the governor saying, I should never get out of prison because of what I've done to these people and to their families. And he was not a chaplain, but like a pastor of hardened criminals who were doing life sentences who will never get out. And he was teaching the Bible studies in the prison. That was his ministry. That's where the Lord has put him. Very close friend of mine. I love the guy. You can't believe he did what he did, but he did. And he told me, the world is sick. There's people who send him fan mail. There are women who send him love letters and valentines. This is a crazy man before he got saved. Who's crazy? He's not crazy anymore. He's the mind of Christ. The people who send him love letters and fan mail have got to be crazy. I can understand the craziness of the world. But how can anybody who has the mind of Christ subscribe to the craziness in the so-called church? How can you listen to people like Glick or Copeland or Hinn or T.D. Jakes? What I saw in the world was one thing. Seeing it in the church is something else. And I saw it. Now, I'm being honest. This guy, when David Johansen died a few weeks ago, sorry I didn't get a chance to share the gospel with him, but Clem Burke is a guy who knew what I believed. And if I knew he was sick, I just wish I could have 20 minutes with him. that I could have drove up the road in Los Angeles to see him in Studio City and just talk to him. He would have seen me. Or being in the hotel in London, and I didn't even want to go up the stairs, not because I wouldn't have been glad to see him. It's just I was turned off by what I'd come out of, what I'd been saved out of. To be in the world, not of it. That is a growth process in itself. I would urge you not to make the mistake I've made. I should have went out of my way when they offered me stage passes or things to come see them. I could have went to see him and at least had a relationship again and tried to share the gospel in some way. I mean, those days they say you use Jesus freak, but for old time's sake, they would put up with me. Let's put it that way. I mean, I went through a lot with Clem when his mother was dying with breast cancer and all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I could tell, but no point in it anymore. No, I wish I had spent a bit of time with him. And I had opportunities to do it, and I didn't. And now I regret it. Please, our loved ones, our friends in the world, okay, we can't be friends with the world. We're called to be in the world, but not of it. We need to pray for our friends, or former friends, let's call them, our loved ones. And we need to seek opportunities to share Jesus with them. And I sound like a hypocrite right now because I would have had opportunities to talk to Clem and I didn't do it. Now he's dead. And as far as I know, he didn't know Jesus, as far as I know. Hope I'm wrong. But that is my present circumstance. I just found out about this not 2 hours ago. And I didn't intend to talk about anything like this. But it's where I find myself at the moment. Not that the world revolves around me. Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. There's a difference between not loving the world and cloisterism, thinking you can escape carnality or sin or temptation by locking yourself up in a monastery or a convent. People tried to do that, and they became even more carnal than the other people. Just look at the Roman Catholic Church and the pedophilia and all this. To be in the world, but not of it. We have to make a living. We have to be in the world, but not to be of it. But there are things that just, from the world, from my old self, from the drugs and the immorality that went with it, I just failed to do things that I should have. I think of the woman at the well. She left her wrong beliefs of the Samaritans. Well, she didn't leave the Samaritans. Bad company corrupts good morals. Don't hang out with unsaved people socially. But privately, if you can keep your relationship with them and try to be a witness to them, we should do it. Now, sometimes I have done that with family and sometimes workmates or business associates, things like that. I have done that. But other times I failed. And I repent before the Lord. This is a time I failed. I was in the same hotel with him. I knew he was in the hotel. people I was working with saw them. All I would have had to do was pick up the house phone, call the desk, ask them to call me, call their room. I didn't do it. All I had to do was jump in the car, drive 10 minutes to Los Angeles. 10 minutes. I didn't do it. When I got a greeting, turned the call, got a stage pass. How you doing? Oh boy. To be in the world but not of it. Bad company corrupts good morals, but leave the world, not the people in it. And I got to be honest with you. This is a case where I have failed. I have failed. I knew the doctrine, I knew the theology, but I failed. In it, not of it. I've said it 100 times. But this is a case where, although I said it, I didn't do it. I should have tried to reach him. I mean, he knew what I believed, but we haven't talked in so long. I don't know. Maybe I'm just feeling bereaved, but I'm also feeling convicted. I blew it this time. I blew it. I'm normally quite happy to be evangelistic. I always got a Bible with me. I almost always have tracts with me. But what happened, happened. The whole scene just turned me off so much and reminded me of things, and I don't know. In the world, but not of it. Bad company corrupts good morals. Leave the world, but not the people in it. Don't be of the world. But the Lord has put us in it to be his witnesses. By his grace, sometimes I have done that. But in this instance, it is a time I did not. And I confess this to the body of Christ. And I confess it to the Lord. I made a mistake. Thank you so much for listening and bearing with me. I know this sounds rather self-indulgent, but I do think it has a message and a meaning for all of us. God bless and have a better weekend than I'm having.